Welcome back to the Next Practices podcast. Today, we're diving into a fascinating case study on student success and the danger of institutional assumptions. We're joined by two leaders from Slippery Rock University who are doing more than just hitting their retention targets. They are fundamentally re-examining the relationship between the university and the student. We talk about why hitting your retention goals might actually be the most dangerous time for your institution to stop learning, how to experiment with student success while the university is still in motion, featuring a deep dive case study into a design experiment that the team did with women in business, and how to move the campus from a conversation about what's wrong with these students to one about what's wrong with our assumptions about them. Please welcome John Rindy and Emily McLean to the show. So welcome to Next Practices, Emily and John. Welcome back to you, John. I'm so happy both of you are here.
Great to be here.
I'm so glad.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get started on the meat of our conversation, I'd love for you each to introduce yourselves to our audience and also to share a little bit about Slippery Rock University. John, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. My name is John Rindy, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Career and Academic Progress at Slippery Rock University. I've been here about 15 years, and we are part of, Emily and I both are part of the enrollment management family. So if you think of it in two parts, the folks that get them here and the folks that keep them here, and then propel them onto careers. We're kind of on the keep them here and propel them to careers side. And Slippery Rock is a regional comprehensive university. We average about 8,800 students in the fall. We have bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, all the classic areas, but we do specialize in a lot of areas. Like we have a very large safety management program, the largest campus-based program in the country. We have 5 or 6 engineering, accredited engineering programs, and health sciences. We're very strong in the health sciences and have graduate programs in PT, OT, PA, and let Emily introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Emily McLean. I'm the Associate Director for Academic Success Design within our Center for Career and Academic Progress. I oversee our success coaching program, as well as a variety of initiatives that support student academic success and thriving.
I have to say, I love the fact that your title has design in it. I've been in student success a really long time and have never heard that in a title, but it makes so much sense. One of the things we're say here at Civitas Learning is that student success is not an initiative, it's an operating system. And design really lends itself to that this is a process and way of being at an institution, not like a one-off action. So that's just interesting. I had a comment on that part of your title.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was an intentional choice that John and I made. It comes from a lot of our framework and foundation centering around life design and our training with Stanford University on design thinking. We embed design thinking into everything we do. And I'm sure that's something we'll talk a lot about this afternoon.
Well, to kick us off, John, you and I have had several conversations in the past. If you haven't already listened to John's first podcast episode in our Next Practices feed, I encourage you to look back on that episode and have a listen to hear an earlier iteration of the work that he and Emily have been working on for years. But you've noted many times that retention numbers strengthen, the work actually becomes more complex rather than easier. And I think, many institutions are so focused on hitting that retention number. We don't always think about what happens afterwards. Many institutions can plateau when that low hanging fruit is gone and they've kind of exhausted all the obvious best practices. Can you talk a little bit about like the mindset shift required to keep experimenting and learning when the system is already performing well? And I assume based on Emily's title that design thinking plays a really big role here, but I just want to unpack that and why is it dangerous to kind of stop learning once the metrics look good?
Yeah, modern day philosopher Eric Hoffer said something to the effect of the person who has finished learning is preparing to live in a world that no longer exists. And so the moment we've stopped learning about ourselves, learning about our students, learning about our data and how to think about those data, then we are going to freeze where we are in retention practice and in new student enrollment. We have a great enrollment year coming up here at the Rock. We're very excited about our incoming freshman class, be a record high average GPA as well. So we've got some very capable students coming on. But that also means with a larger class, again, Emily and I have a lot of thinking and a lot of designing to do. And so I think the first thing I just want to mention, and I'm eager to hear Emily expand upon some of the things I'm saying, because we're in a lot of initiatives together. We spend a lot of time together. That first of all, you have to have some people that love the data and want to ask a lot of questions about the data. We have a cool meeting that happens once a month with our director for analytics and decision support, Dr. Kevin McCarthy. And it would have been this morning, actually. Kevin had something else to do, and I had to run to a meeting as well, but we'll have it next month. And all we do is write research questions on the board, and we spend 90 minutes digging into data to try to answer the research questions, and also asking the question, should we try to design a retention experiment around this? So we do a lot of, as Emily said, a lot of design thinking, a lot of very purposeful experimental design. Uh, so when things start getting tougher, right, when you've cleaned up what we would call low-hanging fruit, two examples here would be our business undeclared and our exploratory students. We know that undeclared students tend to leave universities at rather high rates, probably in the 45% range in our state system here prior to us taking some interventions. But now that we've kind of worked on that, those students are persisting at around more like 85%. And so now that that's fixed, you're asking the question, now what? Well, you have to have somebody that's interested and is looking more into that needle in the haystack. But really, some of the Civitas products have helped us identify it, but also just our 90-minute data meeting with Kevin, Emily, and myself, we're constantly talking about those different things. For example, one thing we're really going to start looking at is our second semester. I mean, we're only losing about 5% of our first time in college class in the first semester, but we're losing closer to 9% in the second. So that's, to me, we've just uncovered a low-hanging fruit, but there's multiple ways to address it. I don't know if Emily wanted to stack on top of that or not.
Yeah, this is complacency is a challenging thing for me. I can't get my head around it. I think having natural curiosity and acknowledging that change is constant is so important in our work. Just because we're doing a great job doesn't mean that students are going to stop living and being. It doesn't mean that their learning is going to stop or plateau. And so, how can we think that it makes sense for us to? So I get stuck on that a lot. It might be in some of the training and the way that our office culture functions. But I also think when you work in education, there just has to be this expectation that you're going to continue to design and refine and try new things. For example, we do have, like John said, students persisting at a higher rate, and so our low-hanging fruit has changed. What happened for us is we noticed that the persistence prediction percentage and the very high through low categories weren't useful anymore. And instead, we started using the quartiles. The way quartiles work, you'll always have students in the bottom quartile. Maybe the averages change of where they're at, but they're still there. And so as we've refined our efforts, we're looking at those students that are in the bottom quartile, even if they might not have been as low hanging as the previous low hanging fruit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's the goal line kind of moves, but there's still going to be variation in the success. So it's not like you've eliminated a need just because you're hitting that goal retention number. There's still going to be students who are having challenges that the university could probably better meet, and those needs are going to change. And so it's reevaluating how you're looking for those opportunities. I think, John, you likened it to like kind of looking around to see if there's hidden fruit, which I found it to be a really useful way to think about this.
Yeah, that's right. And the other way to think about it, Katie, is that it's not always up to Emily and I and the Center for Career and Academic Progress to solve the issue. Sometimes we can turn to partners. And this is where we really get into institutional culture. Are you heavily siloed and really have a culture that doesn't work well together? Do you have deans who are resistant? Do you have faculty who are particularly resistant, or do you have a culture where you can walk into your dean's office? Certainly Emily or I could walk into really any of our dean's offices. In fact, I was at a retreat today with our dean of College of Business, who's so enthusiastic and so exciting to work with, as well as most of his faculty are great to work with too. So when we want to do an initiative, when we come up with an idea, hey, we've noticed you're losing this many students in the second semester, We think that can change. Would you like to work with us to do that? We usually get yeses here on our campus, and that's why we have such strong outcomes. But we also have a belief in our office, and the belief is nobody in higher education is successful sitting in their office waiting for things to happen. I have a saying that's Emily could probably mouth the words as I say it. It's take it to the people. She knows it. She's heard it a million times. So tutoring doesn't sit there waiting for tutoring. They go set up a table outside of Chem 107, Gen Chem 1, because we know that is the course that gets the most requested tutoring, and it's a high DFW course too. So we're not going to wait for them to come. We're going to set up some tabling outside that class the first day of classes in fall semester. And our tutor leads can say, gather around everybody real quick before you go in, before they open the door. Let me talk with you about tutoring because you're going to need it. And that's not like this negative self-fulfilling prophecy. Emily and I have worked very hard to help students understand that you should not pay your money at window one and then drive off with your food. You are paying for tutoring. You are paying to raise your hand when you have a question, and you shouldn't feel bad about that.
We
Yeah.
work a lot with our students to break down the dysfunctional beliefs that affect their success, as well as challenge them to, and this is a dysfunctional belief, but push against the stigmas around help seeking. So that's another, I think, somewhat directly related to what we're talking about. Another argument against the complacency here that I'm thinking about is how so much of what we do in higher ed is cyclical around the academic year, but also the turnover of our students. And so how can you become complacent when all of the students you have right now, and they're going to be gone in 4 years, you're going to have new students. So you still have to be continuing to work for those students, the new students that aren't here yet. There's something around pressure to try something, assess it, decide if it failed or if it worked. And if it worked, great, keep doing it just as is, or completely get rid of it. The way John and I work is quite different. We are prototyping things, we are continuously assessing, and then we are building them and changing them, and we allow an iterative process to just be how we work. So if there is a pressure from the top that says you need to know if this worked after 2 weeks and then either cut it or just do as is, that's not going to be conducive to the initiative to thrive. Like we need to be able to have a longitudinal assessment plan, and we need to be able to iterate and design and continue refining our approach.
Oh man, that's what you just said is so important because that's been my experience in higher ed and the corporate world is that you've got to pilot something. Does it work? Does it not work? Move on to the next thing. And oftentimes something may or may not work there are so many variables influencing that can be evaluated and shifted and changed. I think this idea of treating these less as initiatives and more as experiments and it really is an empowering shift into the direction of that these are not like disconnected actions, but these are like systems that have to evolve over time. I know that John, I've heard you say the phrase learning while the system's still moving, or we say, building the plane while it's still flying. I think a great example of this that I've seen in your work is the design retention experiment that you did with the Women in Business organization. Can you walk us through that specific? I think I initially in my question said initiative, but I'm going to change that to experiment. How did you evolve those constituents and what was that decision making process, and what was that feedback loop or that iterative process like throughout that experiment? Or if you have a better experiment you'd like to share, you could do that as well. That's just one that I know of.
Well, that initiative is just getting started here. I have another meeting coming up on that here shortly. And as you're framing your question, the pages are turning in my head because I have an answer for every one of those, and I'll try to keep them short. So the idea for that came from a couple of standpoints. First of all, we were able to use the initiative impact tool in the Civitas learning system. And of course, Emily and I are always running studies in there. And one thing we discovered over the last few years is that our fraternity sorority life here has a wonderful positive impact on student persistence semester to semester. We just ran it again and it's still there. But even in descriptive statistics of the, let's say, 70 students who joined Greek life in the fall, 69 are still here. So that is really, really exciting, especially being a Sigma Chi myself. So I love to see that. We do Greek right here is how we say it. We do Greek right. So I started thinking about, we always think about what can we do in an area like Center for Career and Academic Progress. What could I talk the deans into doing? What could I have this faculty chairperson doing? But then I started thinking, you know, those students are almost generating retention in and of themselves through their relationships they're building. And then I started saying, are we missing something here? Are we missing partnering with student organizations on retention experiments? About that time, there was a new organization forming in our College of Business called WIB, or Women in Business. It was run, the president, vice president, and some of the officers are just stellar students who you just know their name, even though we have over 8,000 students. They're just names you just know because they're just stellar students over in our College of Business. And I know it's going to be an organization that is going to just take off. And I started thinking, over the last couple of years, we've seen some of our let's say underrepresented groups or at-risk groups, which oftentimes is thought of as male students alone. Female students tend to progress faster than at a higher persistence rate than male students. We actually flipped that script here in the last couple of years, where male students were persisting at higher rate than female students. We were working on different initiatives to help that to happen. So I went to the president and vice president of WIB, Women in Business, and said to Andrea and Crislin, how'd you like to be part of a retention experiment next year where we sort of help you recruit some great students, since you're growing a brand new organization? I'm trusting you with those relationships, but let's build in some deliberate mentoring and engagement with executive and residents and some other programs that would be exclusive to your club and organization. Then we look back and say, at least descriptively, what was the retention rate of our female students in the past in those particular majors, and what is it after this engagement next fall? And so we have the faculty advisors, Dr. Nichols and Dr. Vita, who are interested in supporting it as well. So this is going to be an experiment, a designed experiment specifically with a strong organization with very strong student leaders. And goodness gracious, if that proves successful over the long run, think of the possibilities when you have 200 clubs and organizations on a campus like Slippery Rock.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think one of the other things, in addition to setting up and using design thinking to set up these experiments and identify these pockets of opportunity that might be maybe in other student success approaches are harder to identify, is the coalition building that you've been able to do on your campus and bringing in different stakeholders across the campus. I know from my experience working with customers and even working in higher ed, my own higher ed career, this is not always as easy as it may seem on a lot of campuses. There can be long held institutional processes and assumptions and beliefs that are hard for people to change and shift. And when you're kind of working to bring in and foster this campus culture, which you referred to earlier, John, that campus culture is like a really big part of this. Where do faculty and staff, how do you get faculty and staff on board? How do you get them to kind of be open to these experiments, and then open to the findings of these experiments might challenge what they know to be true, and their perception, and make feel a little threatening? I know that oftentimes one of the biggest places of pushback we get when it comes to the initiative analysis or any kind of evaluation is it revealing things that don't work, and then those people becoming really sensitive to that. Emily, I see you like really shaking your head. I'll start with you, and then John, if you want to jump in on building this coalition across your campus.
That's such a good question, Katie. So I had this situation recently. We have identified a few course insights, some flags and signals through that tool within Civitas of some courses with a flag around the grade of C in the class being a tipping point, and another one with high DFW rates. And when I was talking with the faculty for these courses, there was some defensiveness that came up in the conversation. And in that moment, I had to pause and really put myself in their shoes and think about what concerns might they be having, and how can I open this conversation even more into a way that they can really understand where I'm coming from, that I'm not attacking them, but we're trying to look at how can we use these big data points to just drive small changes. This isn't about their teaching. It isn't about the course or the curriculum. It's about there are students in this course who are struggling, and we want to get to those students. So I think the the tips around the coalition building come back to what we try to do for students. We want to build a strong relationship with our students. We need to build strong relationships with each other. And that can't always be us just asking for what we need. It needs to be us getting to know them, us caring about them, us showing up for them, celebrating them. We have an exemplary advising training series where we're helping faculty grow in their advising practice. And there are quite a few really deep reflective prompts that are in the Success Advocate training sessions that I host. In those sessions, we talk about it's Relationship Rich Education by Peter Felton and Leo Lambert. They have 4 principles that they talk about being really central to having a relationship rich campus. And those are: the students need to experience genuine welcome and deep care. The students need to be inspired to learn. The students need to have a web of significant relationships, and the students need to experience questions of meaning and purpose. And that has to happen across campus. And so we talk about in this training session, those same 4 principles should be true to the relationships we have with each other. Am I showing my campus colleague genuine welcome and deep care? Am I inspiring them to engage in this collaboration with me? Am I bringing them into the fold and helping them be connected to other resources that are going to help them thrive in their context? And are we discussing together these questions of meaning and purpose as it relates to our mission and vision at SRU? So when I start thinking about caring about my campus partners the same way I care about my students, I've noticed that my own approach and technique to those communications changes.
I love
Yeah.
that framework. It makes so much sense. It's, sometimes we get, especially right now with the growth of AI, I think sometimes we get away from, at the end of the day, these are human relationships in every way, us between students, between colleagues, between departments, and especially between colleagues, for all there for the same purpose, which is to educate and foster success for our students. So it's such a good reminder and a really powerful framework. John, did you have anything to add there?
Now you see why I love working with Emily. She's really has a lot of fervor for this work, and it's great being literally 30 feet from her every day. But more, probably just more on the practical side, and that's to say that Emily's been with Slippery Rock around 9 years. I've been here around 15 years, so we've built a lot of relationships over those years, and we just have a culture that is definitely a drop-in culture. So Emily and I know the deans and we know the chairpersons. We have a really great complement of faculty chairs right now. If we need to get something done, we can do that. We don't have assistant deans, but we do have a faculty member in every college that gets one coursework release to work with the deans. It's considered an assistant to the dean. And we're now just starting to turn the corner on the assistants to the deans being very powerful resources, not only using some of our Civitas products, but also helping us implement some of those experiments. So I would say, practically speaking, people know us. They know that we have good hearts. We have good hearts for the institution, that we love students like our own kids, and that we love our faculty members. The term I always use is we kind of leave our families every day and come home to our family, and we try to treat people like that. Not everybody wants to be treated that way in higher education, and sometimes we run up against folks here as well. But by and large, we can get things done, and we get a lot of support. Also, shout out to my supervisor, our vice president for enrollment management, Mike May. He adopted a division that has been strong both in attracting and keeping students for a long time. Slippery Rock's been in the 80% retention since 2008. So this isn't a new thing for us, but now moving into greater heights into the 86, heading for 87%. I always say, before I retire, I'd love to see us at 90% retention. And we see it in the data. Emily and I both see it in the data. We know it can happen here. And it's just a matter of, one piece at a time, harnessing the power of those different departments and getting people to experience the data, be interested in the data, and then be interested in those results of those experiments that we run. There's a lot of excitement around data. We try to be very data transparent too. So people know that we're kind of the data people on top of our analytics and decision support people. If they want to know things, they often come to us. So, and our former vice president for enrollment management used to say, if it moves, we measure it. But I think some schools do measure, but they don't always use the data then. We do. We employ data very heavily. I was up till 9 or 10 o'clock having fun with data. Emily knows because I emailed her some of it. But we loved having fun with data, and we uncover so many interesting things. And of course, the Civitas products help us do that even more robustly.
Yeah, I think you really hit on something, John, that I see as a challenge often too, is this idea of like you have the information, but what do you do with it? Like, how do you transform that insight? What we would say is insight into action can be really challenging. And there's a lot of reasons for that, for sure. But I think that that is what's powerful is that you have those, I think by framing it as experimentation or as a research question, that then you're going to kind of theorize a solution for and then experiment to see if that tests that theory makes taking action so much more natural versus like us reviewing something kind of post-mortem and then everybody's saying like, yeah, I guess that's what happened, or oh, that's a concerning trend, which I think is what's happened across higher ed for many many years. One of the other themes I hear you guys kind of consistently coming back to is assumption, and that there's a lot of assumptions about how high like students behave, or assumptions about what they're capable of, or about what they're going to do. So I'd love to talk about that. I know that sometimes our assumptions can conflict. We learn more. Data can be surprising when you have fun with data, as you put it, John. You might find out interesting things that challenge your assumptions. Can you share a little bit about how challenging assumptions, helping those on your campus challenge common assumptions, like, for example, our students maybe aren't as academically inclined, or these particular students are higher risk, so they're going to be at higher risk, is actually shaking out in the data, and how do you how those assumptions might actually inadvertently be creating barriers for students that you're unpacking?
Absolutely. In one of our data meetings recently, I challenged Emily and Dr. McCarthy to ponder a question I had been pondering. Right down the road from us, so we are the second most competitive school for admissions in Western Pennsylvania, behind and quite a bit behind Carnegie Mellon. And so everybody knows Carnegie Mellon, a very research steeped institution. And I had an acquaintance who was going to be doing an interview at Carnegie Mellon, and they said to me, I'd like to learn some retention buzzwords. And I kind of giggled and I said, retention's not really a big discussion at Carnegie Mellon because they retain their students into year two at probably close to 98%. And then I started asking the question, wait a minute, why don't we retain our students at 98%? What assumptions are we making about our students that may be driving the fact that we lose some of them? And I think every school ought to do that. Now I'll pause there because I brought it up at the end of one of our data meetings, but I know Emily has a lot to say about this as well. She can certainly chime in on this whole idea. We also challenge student assumptions. One thing we always say to students, and we have to kind of explain it to them sometime because they don't maybe know the nomenclature of a Gen Xer or a millennial, and that is Slippery Rock is not a place you come to give it the good old college try. That's not who we are. We can recommend other schools, but that's not who we are. We expect you to come here. We expect you to attend class. We expect you to use resources. We expect you to graduate, and we expect you to find gainful employment that makes you joyful. And that's an expectation we set through the entire admissions funnel too. So we are really big on assumptions about what college is about on the student side. But Emily, do you want to expand a little bit on the whole idea of assumptions we make about our own students that might get in the way? And we're just now starting to dig into this a little bit, Katie.
Yeah, I'd love to. At the core of my professional identity, I'm a coach first. And coaching psychology is the other foundation that's really important here. Because as a coach, one of the central ways of being for me is to have this limitless, positive regard and belief in my students. And so our view or perspective perhaps on our students leans highly anti-deficit, right? Let's not look at all of the things that are wrong with the students. There's an ancient proverb that was mentioned in a book that I read recently, and I wish I could give proper attribution, but it goes something like this, that the seed is falling from the oak tree already with everything in it that it needs to become that oak tree. Of course, it has to land in an environment where it's going to be cultivated in that soil and it gets the nutrients and sunlight and all of those things, right? But the makeup inside of the seed is already there. Why don't we think of our students that way? They have everything within them to be successful and to reach their dreams it's not about us. There's this element of removing ourselves and suspending our assumptions to really be able to then show up and be the environment they need to thrive. So I think philosophically, like this just gets me really excited because as coaches, we're challenging assumptions all day long. Now, when we think about the assumptions that we place on our students, I think it's really important that as higher ed practitioners, we are constantly considering what biases are putting kind of a cloud over how we see our students' potential. And so training on cultural competence, training on anti-deficit frameworks, having conversations with our colleagues around, our awareness of those things, I think is really critical here. And our team has a longstanding experience of being vulnerable and courageous to show up in those types of conversations.
The concept of value also came up in that whole conversation. So, for example, let's look at that whole retention scenario a different way. If CMU retains their students at 98%, another school that I really admire, they're more like an aspirational peer, like James Madison has a 90% first year retention, and I do study a little bit about some of the things they seem to do there. That also is translated like this to me: their students, 90% of their students see enough value that they want to come back. 98% of Carnegie Mellon students see some sort of value, even though they're from all over the world. It's not like I'm going to leave to live closer to home. They don't. They see the value. So that the reciprocal of that is painful in asking, what value don't our students see that 14% of them leave in that first year, which is great, of course. I mean, it's not great that they leave, but it's still good retention is the point. So that causes us to say, all right, what value is our student seeing? What value are we not conveying? Because we have some of those same opportunities that you can find at Carnegie Mellon or James Madison. Research with a faculty member, independent research, job shadows, informational interviews, early college work-based learning, micro internships. The list can go on and on. Company provided projects for them to work on. So how are we not conveying value that students are choosing to? Well, we don't have a big transfer out rate. Some of them just give up, right? If they stop out. I don't know if Emily had anything to expand on there. So it's also the value proposition.
And what environments do we give our students to puzzle through their questions around the value of their degree or of their time at Slippery Rock? How are we supporting them and challenging them to think differently through all of this, right? I think that it's one thing to question if they have that value, if they're placing value on their SRU experience in the same way a Carnegie student might. But I think the next layer of that is for any student, regardless of where they're at and how they're valuing it, who are the people, where are the spaces where they can really make sense of what is mattering most, what's getting in the way of the barriers. And that goes back to, what our center does to offer students the space to have a life design discussion, to explore their values, their goals, their relationships, what's encouraging them to take action, their mindset, the assumptions they're making. Students have to have a space to think about these things. And often that might not be happening in the classroom right away. It might not be happening in a 15-minute advising session when you're getting ready to register. So how does the university create a space for those conversations and get students into that space so that way they know these conversations should be happening and that they're important for them to make well-informed choices?
When our admissions folks are giving tours, they'll stop outside of our area, which I refer to as the achievement suite. And I was walking through one day when a tour was coming through with a tour lead that we were familiar with, and I heard her just saying, I listen as I walk by, and she said, through these doors is the opportunity to be the best version of you possible. And I had to stop and go and talk to the crowd at that point. It was just so awesome because that's exactly what we've been aiming for.
Yeah, I think that this idea of value is really important, and not only like having the institution meet the students where they are and all those things that and provide great opportunities, but also having the students understand what they're capable of and believing in themselves and leveraging that seed, all that potential that's locked up inside. I know it can be really, really hard to access. I know we've had a really long, nice, really great conversation with both of you. Before we wrap up, I would love to make space for anything else that you were wanting to share, any other lessons learned or takeaways that maybe we didn't have a chance to get through in the course of our questions today.
Well, I can start by just adding risk taking has got to be allowed.
Mhm.
You know, I try as a leader to assure our entire staff here in the Center for Career and Academic Progress that they can invent and they can ideate, they can invent, they can try. Obviously, because we have the career side, we have some revenues from those career events that we can experiment with. I want them to go to conferences. I want them to give papers. I want them to try new things and experiment. And that's because I have a supervisor in Michael May who wants me to experiment. And we had a former supervisor, Dr. Yale, who retired about 2 years ago, who wanted us to experiment and rewarded us for experimenting and trying and measuring and then adjusting and adapting. And I think, and hopefully Emily would agree, it's a nice place to come to work because we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about how, what is it? You're not supposed to talk about religion or politics at the dinner table. And in higher ed, I think across faculty and staff, it might be like you're not supposed to talk about these challenging assumptions and complacency and some of these other things at the dinner table. But let's talk about it, right? I think having the courage to name the elephant in the room, that's and rumbling through that is really where the growth then happens. And uh, we've been using the language around auditing yourself in a couple of different spaces. So, for example, when I do the success advocate training, we audit our success advocacy, individually and as a group. And in another committee that John and I serve on, we've been talking about how can departments audit their practices, their best practices for how they're supporting student retention within their department or program. And so I would encourage listeners to audit your willingness to lean in to challenging assumptions. Audit your willingness to go beyond complacency. Like really internally look at that and spend that time in reflection. Our team reflects so much internally, but also together. And I think that's been part of the magic of what's happening here. So creating a space for the reflection and being willing to do that courageously and name the things that maybe aren't really encouraged to be named or to be talked about. I think there's a real value in that.
I would agree too, because I mean, without that kind of honest evaluation, how are you going to grow? Like you're going to keep making the same mistakes. You're going to stay, you're going to not progress. And the truth is we live in a world where you have to be very responsive and you have to be proactive and you have to kind of pay attention and you can't kind of sit back on your heels and wait. You have to kind of know what's working and what's not working. It's going to get away from you too fast. So I think having not only the space, like it's one thing to have the tools to do adequate evaluation. Like oftentimes, especially on this podcast, we focus a lot on the data and the infrastructure and the access to information and breaking down silos between departments, just like accessing the information and then making meaning of that and taking action on it. But I think you bring up such a powerful piece of this puzzle, which was allowing an institution to really be honest and evaluate assumptions and test, experiment, iterate. It's really powerful because that's how you progress. Without it, you really can't. Thank you both so much for coming on. Thank you, John, for returning to the show. I really appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure, Katie. It's always great to see you, whether in person or on Zoom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Emily. And that's the show. We're a wrap.